Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for another story here at Annie Narrates. The title for today's story goes like this. Dad knew his new wife hates me to the core, but didn't care. So I started living with my grandpa. Now I'm watching family Crapstorm as Dad's not getting any of Grandpa's estates. Hello, I've had a lot of things on my mind lately and I'm feeling very overwhelmed, so I thought I'd come on here and share it all with you. I don't know why I'm doing this, maybe to get some clarity or advice. Maybe I just need to vent and get it out of my system. Anyway, here it goes. I, 25 female, came from a pretty wealthy family. My grandfather started a successful furniture business way back in the 60s. It was initially a very small project. He had to start right from scratch and build a good reputation for himself. However, with a lot of hard work and perseverance, he eventually started getting bigger clients and bigger projects, and through the decades, the business has flourished and grown under my grandfather's keen observations and guidance. He invested a lot of his money in property and over time, accumulated several estates which he used to rent out. However, after I was born, he gifted one of his estates to my parents. He lived in the main estate, which also served as a place where he stored most of the furniture, inventory, and stock. I was an only child. My parents had tried many times for another child but to no avail. My father always wanted a son, and I could tell that he was always a little bitter about the fact that he didn't have one, and in a way, blamed my mother for not being able to conceive again. I was very young at the time, but the way that he spoke to her about these sensitive issues always rubbed me the wrong way. While growing up, my father and I weren't particularly close. I tried my hardest to get his attention as any child would, but detested the fact that I was a girl, and to please him, I tried to be as ungirly as possible. I never wore dresses, always played sports, went horseback riding, and aced in these fields. However, he never acknowledged any of my achievements. My mother was my rock. She supported everything that I did, but I could see that my father's taunts and constant belittling had taken a toll on her, especially on her mental health. Over time, she stopped involving herself in things, never woke up, and always kept to herself. She was suffering from depressive episodes and needed professional help, but every time she spoke to my father about it, she dismissed her and said that she was just being lazy and didn't want to fulfill her duties. My mother passed away when I was 7. I don't want to get into the details because it's too painful to think about. She suffered from depression and that ultimately led to her death. It would be an understatement if I had said that my relationship with my father deteriorated even more after my mother's death. I was only 7, but I knew the way that my dad had dismissed all of my mom's issues instead of helping her out completely shattered her. So in a way, I kind of blame him for her death. I also blame him for disregarding all the major signs that she was calling out for help. My grandparents came over to stay a couple of months after my mother had passed, and it was a relief having them around because my father pretty much abandoned me. He left me and went out of town for a few weeks after the funeral. He didn't even inform us that he was leaving. He didn't bother checking up on how I was doing after literally the worst experience of my life. At a time when I was so fragile and vulnerable, and where we had to mutually support each other and needed each other, he left me with my grandparents. We all assumed that he wanted to be alone so that he could grieve privately and deal with his emotions and decided to give him some space. But it was a huge shock to us all when he showed up at home 2 weeks later with a much younger lady at his side. He introduced her as Stephanie. She would have been around my age at the time, around 25. She was much younger than my father. He then told us that she was going to be my quote-unquote nanny, and that she was going to be staying with us from now onwards. Since my mother had passed away, he felt that I needed someone to raise me and he didn't feel inclined to do that himself, so he got Stephanie to help out. I think my grandparents could see through his lies the minute they saw Stephanie. It had hardly been a month since my mother's passing, and my father was already with someone new. Now, a little backstory about my grandfather and father. My father was the oldest son in the family, and my grandfather thought that once he was old enough, my dad would take over the furniture company. My dad, on the other hand, showed no interest in the family business and preferred to spend his time doing leisure activities instead of working. Since my dad grew up wealthy, unlike my grandfather, he never had to struggle a day in his life and always knew that even if he failed in any of his frivolous interests, he'd always have my grandfather and the furniture business to fall back on. Because of this, he grew complacent and lazy and barely involved himself in the business, much to my grandfather's dismay. The only reason my grandfather gave him one of the estates when I was born was because my father had wasted a lot of money on his hobbies and had no money to buy a house and start a family. My granddad had a soft spot for my mother and didn't want her to suffer just because of my father. Naturally, when my grandfather saw Stephanie, he knew what my father was up to. Stephanie, who was supposed to be my quote-unquote nanny, was as useful to me as a rock. I could tell that she didn't like me from the day that she saw me, and she didn't put any effort into getting to know me either. We barely interacted, and I was okay with that when I was a kid, and I would mostly spend time with my grandmother, while my father and her went out on elaborate dates and vacations. It was clear after a few months of Stephanie's arrival that she was not really my nanny, but my father's girlfriend. I tried to get to know her a bit, but every time she was around me, she would say that I was being too loud and giving her a headache, only for me to be sent away. My father couldn't care less about how I was doing because he was too busy trying to impress Stephanie. He proposed to her within the same year, and they had an elaborate wedding in a vineyard. I remember being so excited to go to the vineyard because I would get to meet my cousins who I hadn't seen in a while. But my father told me that I was not going to go to the wedding because I would be a distraction and try to ruin the wedding, and Stephanie did not want anything to go wrong on her special day. I can't lie, this still stinks today. Even though my father and I weren't close, I wasn't expecting him to do this and I was heartbroken. My grandparents were furious at my dad for this. I remember a huge fight broke out between them. My grandfather said that I was being treated horribly and that my dad was being extremely selfish by not involving me. But my dad told him that I was a brat and would ruin everything, and he wanted to make sure that the wedding was perfect. My grandfather reminded him that the massive wedding expenses were going to be paid by the family business. My dad was a shareholder and wanted to use this money to fund the wedding. But my dad didn't want to hear another word. My grandparents decided to boycott the wedding and stay back with me instead. But that didn't stop the wedding. After the honeymoon, Stephanie began to show her true colors. So far, she had only accused me of being annoying. She knew that my father didn't like me, and she played on that fact. She would accuse me of hitting her and throwing tantrums, trying to hurt her, and all sorts of lies to my father, who of course believed her and punished me by grounding me or banning me from playing sports. I kept minding my own business because I knew that talking back was just going to make my life even worse. Things did get worse when Stephanie fell pregnant, not even a month after the wedding. It was clear that she wanted me out of the house because she wanted to start her own family, and I was the constant reminder of my father's previous marriage, so she did everything in her power to get me in trouble. I was only 9 years old when she accused me of trying to push her down the stairs when I didn't know such thing. I still remembered it vividly. I could tell that she was planning to do something that day because she tried to rile me up by taunting me about my mother. After my father came back home, she put on crocodile tears and began sobbing to my dad, telling him how I was a vengeful, evil child who, out of jealousy, tried to push her down the stairs. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. When I tried to tell him that I had no idea what she was talking about, she started yelling and screaming, falling to her knees, begging my father to send me away because she was fearful for her life. My father, as usual, yelled at me, shut me in my room, and the next day told me that I was going to go to a private boarding school. I cried and protested, begging him to let me stay. I had never been away from home for a few days, and now I had to spend months alone, surrounded by strangers in a completely new place. But despite all my efforts, I was shipped off to a boarding school by the next month. This was a refreshing change. I thought I would hate it, but it was actually a blessing in disguise. Away from the toxicity of my family, I began to thrive both mentally and emotionally. By the time I went back home for the summer, Stephanie had given birth to my baby brother Luke. My father was over the moon. He finally got the son that he wanted so much, and now I was even more of a burden to him. One evening, while I was playing with Luke, Stephanie ran towards him, screaming that I was choking him and that he had gone blue. Before I could even understand what was going on, she dragged my father outside and yet again accused me of hurting Luke. She said that I was a menace in the family and had bad intentions of hurting Luke. This time, she said that boarding school wasn't working and that I couldn't stay with them anymore. She said that she had nightmares because of me and she wouldn't be able to sleep thinking of me wandering around the house trying to hurt her or Luke. This was the first time my father slapped me, but the slap hurt less than what he said next. He said that I never should have been born. It was a mistake marrying my mother, and his biggest regret in life was me. After that incident, I had no more love for my father. I began staying with my grandparents and my life changed for the better. I actually felt loved and respected here, and honestly felt like I should have done this earlier and saved myself from years of trauma. My dad had another son, but I barely visited that place anymore and didn't really care at that point. I grew super close with my grandpa, and over the years, I started taking an interest in the family business. I would go along with him for his inventory and quality checks, and he would teach me about how he stores the raw materials and budgeting and so forth. By the time that I was 18, I knew the ins and outs of the business so much that I pursued a degree in business administration in college with his support. I am eternally grateful to my grandfather for motivating me and inspiring me to pursue my dreams. My grandfather clapped the loudest when I graduated. My parents didn't bother showing up. He offered me a job in the company after graduation, and I accepted. I was genuinely interested in the field and wanted to put all my knowledge to good use. Under the guidance of my grandpa, I began getting clients of my own and building contacts until I was pretty dependable and indispensable part of the company. I didn't have much contact with my father or his family in the past few years. It had been more than a decade since I lived with them, but from what I heard, my father had gone back to wasting money on his useless habits again. Earlier this year, my grandfather had a health scare. He suffered a heart attack and was admitted to the hospital for a week. I went to see him every day and was relieved when he was discharged and back home. He told me that he was getting too old to work and wanted to retire. He also gave me a huge promotion. In his absence, I would be in charge of way more clients and there were more responsibilities as well. I was shocked. Grandpa had worked so hard his whole life. He deserved a good rest. Yes, I was also working my hardest, but still felt unsure about whether I would be able to live up to his expectations, but he reassured me and I promised him that I would make him proud. I went back home and was shocked to see my father there practically yelling at my grandfather for removing his name from the will. He saw me and he nearly attacked me, blaming me for brainwashing my grandfather into giving me all the inheritance. He was clearly drunk and having sort of a manic episode. I hadn't seen him in years, but he looked much older than he was. He began throwing things, telling my granddad to give him back his stock, otherwise he would hurt himself. I managed to calm him down as best as I could, but he refused to listen. He kept oscillating between crying and throwing a massive tantrum. I was scared for my grandfather's safety, especially because he was still recovering. So I managed to convince my dad to stay the night so that he could sober up before he hurt himself or anyone else. In the morning when he was back in his senses, he apologized for what he did, but kept demanding to be added back to the will. That's when my grandfather told him everything that he had been wanting to tell him for years. He said that my father was a good for nothing. He had been given so many opportunities to prove himself, but he squandered all of them. He never took an interest in the company, so he had no right to have a stake in it. Moreover, he had spent his life in the lap of luxury and wasted all his money on pampering his wife and sons, taking them on luxury vacations every year and buying the exorbitant gifts instead of using it wisely, and now he was on the verge of bankruptcy. I was surprised to hear all this. I had no contact with him for years and I had no idea my father was broke. Apparently, my father didn't take any initiative to change despite knowing that he had no money. He didn't try getting a new job or investing whatever money he had left. His only source of income had been from the family business, and now he wasn't going to get it anymore. My grandfather also told him that he had been a terrible father to me right up from my birth, and that he didn't deserve a daughter like me. He said that I was capable of handling the company in the future, and that's why he made me a shareholder and gave me the estate. My father got furious again, but by this time, even I had no pity for him. He begged my grandfather to reconsider. He said that he wouldn't be able to afford the tuition for his sons, and now that he had no money, Stephanie was threatening to divorce him. It was pathetic to see him make such a big fool of himself. When he saw my grandfather was paying no attention to him, he started targeting me. He started begging me to give him my shares, guilt-tripping me by saying that he loved me. I was disgusted. When I told him that I had no interest in doing anything for him after how he treated me my whole life, he slapped me, again, calling me a bunch of insulting names. My grandfather called security and had him removed from the house. It's been 2 weeks now, and I can't get over this whole thing. My father was facing the consequences of his own mistakes and still found a way of insulting me. He's still living in my house and calls me constantly, but I don't answer. He's tried to speak to me by coming by work, but I can't even look at his face. I've heard that he's been drinking every day and his health is deteriorating. His whole life is in absolute chaos. Apparently, Stephanie threatened to leave him again and take the kids along with her as well. My grandfather told me to just ignore it and let my dad grow up here and actually work for the first time in his life. But somewhere deep down, I feel guilty because everything is in my name now. I am so confused. Am I the a-hole for not helping out? Hi, I'm back with an update. It's been a month since I last wrote, and things have not gotten better. My father is on a downward spiral, and ridiculous to see. I finally decided to speak with him because I was genuinely scared that he was going to do something with himself. I know that many of you had told me to just let him go, especially after he slapped me. As much as I disliked him, I didn't want him to hurt himself. This was my first mistake. When I met him, I saw a new side to him which I had never seen before. He hugged me and showed me more affection than he had shown me in my entire life. He thanked me for letting him stay in the estate. Honestly, I couldn't care less about the estate at the moment. I was staying elsewhere, so it didn't make much of a difference to me. He yet again started pleading with me to let him have some of my money. He knew that my grandfather wouldn't allow it, so he asked me if we would keep this off the record and I could unofficially give him money every month. He said that Stephanie and the kids were used to a certain type of lifestyle and they were really suffering now because they had to fire all the maids and the chef. I couldn't believe he was being this delusional. I told him that he could still stay in the house for now until I found renters, but I was not going to give him money under any circumstances. He started getting agitated, telling me that he didn't raise me to be this selfish and that I owed him for everything that he did for me. That's when I told him that I didn't owe him anything. He was a terrible father my whole life and he didn't love me. If he did, he would have fought for me and not just abandoned me when I needed him the most after my mother's death. He had done nothing for me and treated me like I was a burden, so he had no right telling me what to do. He was fuming. I could tell that he wanted to say something nasty but held himself back. I told him that he should try searching for a job so that he could at least pay for the boys' education, but he practically rolled his eyes at this suggestion and stormed off. I can tell that he's not even going to try to better himself. Even though his children's education is at risk, he still doesn't want to do anything apart from beg me and guilt-trip me into giving him money which he doesn't deserve. This was the last conversation I had with him face to face. I still get voicemails from him where he is drunk and calls me obscene things. I think he's a lost cause. I don't want my brothers to suffer because of him. Even though I don't know them much, I still think I will pay their fees for the coming semester at least until they find a way to earn some money. I don't care about Stephanie or my dad, but I think I should do this for the kids. I got a surprise call from none other than Stephanie today. I hadn't spoken to her in more than a decade, so I was absolutely taken aback to hear her voice. She said that she wanted to meet and I agreed. I wanted to see what she had to say. Seeing her after 10 years made me realize that she had too many plastic surgeries gone wrong. I guess this was where the money was going. She thanked me for paying the boys' fees. She also begged for forgiveness for how she treated me. But I could never forget how she accused me of pushing her and choking my brother. Some things just stay with you no matter how old you get. I told her that it was a one-time thing and that I only did this for the boys, not for her or my dad. She started praising me, saying that I was so good despite everything that I had been through and how she was so sorry for treating me the way that she did. I knew where she was going with this. I wasn't surprised when she yet again begged me to give them a monthly allowance. She was asking for a large sum, but she said that it wouldn't even cover their basic needs. How delusional does one need to be to act like this? I told her that I'm not going to give them any more money. If she wanted to make sure that her sons had a good life, then both she and my dad had to get their act together and get real jobs. I can't believe she had the audacity to even ask me for help after what she did to me. Maybe I'm a bad person, but I couldn't help but feel a little happy when I saw her disappointed face. I don't feel bad for them at all, only for the boys, but I can't help them. My dad and his wife need to grow up and start taking responsibility for something in their lives, and I don't want anything to have to do with that. Maybe I am being a little selfish right now, but I feel it's like karma for what they did to me. Hello everybody, it's been like 2 months since my last update, I think. Anyway, just wanted to hop on here and tell you that both my dad and Stephanie got actual jobs, and my dad stopped drinking. I am as shocked as you are. They are not earning even close to what my dad was getting earlier, but it's a start. I still let them stay at the estate because I have no real use for it as of now, but I made sure to tell them that whenever I do find a suitable renter, they will have to vacate within a certain notice period. They aren't earning enough to fund the boys' education, so my grandfather and I are pitching in only in that department. Everything else is in their expense. These two haven't worked a day in their life, so please pardon me if I found the idea of Stephanie working a 9-to-5 job funny. But I am glad that they are at least trying. I know both of them are cursing me though, and honestly, I don't care. I'm thriving at work and having the best time helping out Grandpa. Now that they are a little stable, I just want to put aside all this drama and focus on work and my relationship. I know, I never mentioned him here, but I'm engaged. I have been dating my fiance for about 5 years now, and he recently popped the question. I think this might be too much information, but I thought I should mention it. Thanks again for hearing me out. I'm in a much better place now. And that was it for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Go ahead and smash the like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again. We will be seeing you in the next one.